with crescent-shaped pupils and a magnificent beard. A large mouth that constantly moves as if recalling the food eaten at noon. A clever and friendly personality that changes its ba in response to people's voices and expressions. I became completely captivated by them and visited them every day. The one who healed my heart, which had been betrayed by my husband Joshua and my sister Margaret, was a mysteriously charming white goat. I am Nancy. I am a 29-year-old nurse working at a hospital. It would be a lie to say that working early mornings and late nights isn't tough, but I am blessed with great colleagues and find my job rewarding. I have a husband, Joshua, who is 3 years older than me, and we got married 2 years ago. He works at a moderately large company, seems to be doing okay in his job, and is considered reliable and honest, which makes his boss take notice of him. Joshua has weekends off and finishes work at 5 p.m., while I have irregular shifts and days off due to early and night shifts. Even after getting married and living together, we only have meals together a few times a week. Still, I was happy to say welcome home, and I'm home, to Joshua, and I was comforted by seeing him enjoy my homemade meals. On the other hand, he is extremely lonely. He feels lonely when he comes home and I'm not there. It was him who quickly wanted to get married after we started dating. He couldn't stand living alone. Despite being bigger than me, he is like a child in how he gets lonely, which is cute but also a bit troublesome. Moreover, I worry about him hanging out with his single friends on weekends when I'm not around. I've considered changing to a hospital without night shifts, but I like my current workplace and the salary is good, so I can't decide easily. Saying I want to change jobs because Joshua gets lonely feels a bit embarrassing too. I wish there was a better reason, like having a child. But what came to me was an unimaginable trigger. One day, after finishing my day shift and returning home, I found a woman with brown hair and wearing shorts sitting in front of the door. When she saw me, her eyes lit up and she hugged me. "Nancy, I missed you." "Huh? Margaret?" It was Margaret. My younger sister by 2 years. The last time I saw Margaret was at my wedding 2 years ago. Ignoring my confusion, Margaret looked up at me with pleading eyes. "Nancy, help me. My boyfriend kicked me out." "Huh? Again?" Hearing Margaret's confession, I held my head in my hands. Margaret is friendly and cute, but very careless. While my parents and I are relatively neat, Margaret's room is always messy. There are half-drunk water bottles lying around, her bed is used as storage, and I've seen her sleeping on clothes scattered on the floor. When we lived together at our parents' home, this drove me crazy, and we often argued. Margaret started living alone near her university after graduating from high school. Enjoying her freedom, she barely attended classes and eventually dropped out. Our furious parents terminated her apartment lease and tried to bring her back home, but having tasted freedom, Margaret didn't want to return. So she started living with boyfriends, working part-time jobs, and living carefree. Initially, her boyfriends would be smitten by cute Margaret and do everything for her, but her laziness and refusal to do housework would soon drive them away, and within a year, she would be kicked out. But she had a knack for sensing when she was about to be kicked out, and she'd usually find a new guy through swipe-based dating apps or parties, leaving before she was shown the door. However, sometimes she'd get kicked out unexpectedly, and during those times, she'd come crying to me, half forcing her way into my place until she found her next boyfriend. Even though I genuinely didn't want to get involved, I couldn't ignore the only sister I had, so I'd end up taking her in. After I got married, she started relying on our parents, and I thought I was finally free. But it seems even our parents reached their limit with her irresponsible lifestyle. With a furious look on his face, my dad told her, Don't come back until you have a steady job and can rent a place. They even took away the keys to our parents' house. Please, Nancy. I'm really in trouble. I'll find a new place soon. Just let me stay here until then. By new place, she meant finding a new boyfriend, of course. You can't, Margaret. Joshua is here now. It's time for you to stand on your own. I know. Just this once, I promise. No way. While I was struggling with Margaret's persistence, Joshua came home from work. I'm home. Huh? Who's this? Margaret's eyes lit up at Joshua's arrival. Joshua, help me. What? Young and cute Margaret flustered Joshua, making his face turn bright red. I had a bad feeling about this. I explained to Joshua that Margaret had broken up with her boyfriend and had nowhere to go, leaving out her habit of hopping from one man's house to another. I was too embarrassed to tell him about her irresponsibility. But perhaps that was a mistake, as Joshua seemed to sympathize with her. Why not? It's just for a little while. As expected, Joshua decided to let her stay. Yay! Joshua, you're the best. Margaret happily clung to Joshua's arm, and though he was surprised, he didn't seem to mind. Naturally, I panicked. I didn't want our precious life together to be invaded by the irresponsible sister. Wait, if we let her stay here, it won't help her in the long run. But she's in trouble. As her sister, you should help her. That may be true, but... Sure, I'm her sister. But does that mean I have to take her in no matter what? I wanted to argue, but I didn't want to disappoint the kind-hearted Joshua. It's only until she finds a new apartment, probably just a month. But I'm busy with work and hardly ever home. It'll be a big burden on you, Joshua. It'll be fine. She's not a child. She can take care of herself, right? Yeah, I won't be a bother. See? It'll be okay. Okay. It definitely wouldn't be okay. I knew it, but I didn't want to be the bad guy by saying no. So, reluctantly, I agreed to let Margaret stay for a month, on the condition that it was only for a month. Of course, this was a mistake. From that day, my life and relationship with Joshua began to change. To Joshua, Margaret was the perfect company for lonely nights and weekends. And for him, who only had brothers, Margaret's sweet, needy nature was irresistibly charming. On the other hand, Margaret, who neither works much nor has many friends, and has no awareness of being considerate towards me, clings to him, who dotes on her. I feel a sense of crisis as they get closer day by day, and even if I urge Margaret to find a room quickly. You're such a terrible sister to try and kick Margaret out. Joshua glares at me. Behind him, Margaret lives a luxurious, lazy life. Joshua pampers her, and since her livelihood is secured, she shows no sign of looking for a place or a man. I need to do something. But just at such times, the night shift staff is short, and I end up working through the night. I tried calling my parents to consult, but Grandma had collapsed, and they were too busy to take on any more stress. The promised month passed in no time, and 3 months after that. Joshua and Margaret naturally became intimate, and now Margaret even carries a life in her womb. It's your fault, always ignoring me for your work. The only one who really cared about me was my true love, Margaret. Holding Margaret's shoulder, he looks down at me with eyes full of hatred. Margaret gently strokes her belly and looks at me triumphantly. She took my home and my husband, and I was quickly left without a place to stay, handed settlement money out of pity. When Margaret gleefully told my parents about her pregnancy, my mom, realizing how terrible things had become for my marriage, fell into shock and took to her bed. My dad scolded her, but the punishment for a pregnant her was light. My in-laws apologized, but since his affair was with my family, it was hard to fully play the victim. I was exhausted, fed up with everything, and quit the job I supposedly loved. I returned to my hometown, nursing my endlessly apologetic mom, feeling as if my dad was avoiding me, and spent my days in a void. 1 month after returning home. As I began to think I needed to find a job here soon, a wedding invitation arrived from Margaret and Joshua. The wedding was set for right after the baby was born. Nancy, you're invited too. If you bless our happiness, he'll forgive you for what you did. So make sure you come. With that letter, which perfectly cast me as the villain, I didn't even have the energy to tear it up. I stuffed it into my bag and got into the car aimlessly. As I drove without any destination, I looked blankly outside while waiting at a red light. What is my life? I thought I had lived sincerely without hurting anyone, so why is the sloppy Margaret living better? Then, I saw a faint white shape on the overgrown embankment. A dog. It was too big for a dog, and its legs were thin. I was really curious and squinted my eyes. The creature was burying its face in the grass, seemingly eating something intently. What is that? Just as I was about to figure it out, the light turned green. I reluctantly stepped on the gas, but couldn't get that white figure out of my mind. I decided to turn around at the intersection and head back to the embankment. I parked in a nearby lot and climbed the embankment. There, I found a goat. A goat was fervently devouring the grass on the embankment. Why is there a goat here? Though it's not downtown, it's still a town with a residential area nearby. Having only seen goats on farms and in zoos, I couldn't fathom why there was a goat here. The goat paid no attention to me and simply continued to devour the grass in front of it. I couldn't take my eyes off the scene, so I sat down next to the goat and watched it eat. Then, as if the goat became curious about me, it lifted its head from the grass and looked at me with its crescent-shaped eyes. And then, for some reason, it shoved its face into my bag. Hey! Wait a minute! Panicking at the goat's strange behavior, I grabbed my bag, but the goat pulled out only an envelope. It was the wedding invitation for Margaret and Joshua. At that moment, "Hey!" someone shouted angrily. At the same time, a large man pulled the letter out of the goat's mouth. "I'm sorry about that. That's our goat, Rice." Rice? Suddenly being apologized to with the word for a carbohydrate, I was confused. Oh, Rice is the name of our pet goat. Wow, it's even chewed on it a bit. The man sighed, looking at the envelope with the goat's bite marks. It's okay. It's just a wedding invitation. But it must be really important. No, it's fine. It's for my ex-husband and sister's wedding. What? Oh. In my attempt to defend the goat, I accidentally revealed this, surprising the man. I felt like running away in embarrassment, but since he still held the envelope, I couldn't. Reluctantly, I explained the situation. The man and the goat listened quietly as I talked. His name, it turned out, was Paul. Although I had just met him, I thought he seemed like a nice person. As I was thinking that, Paul spoke up softly. Are you free right now? What? Well, yes. Then, please come with me for a bit. What? Without waiting for my reply, Paul took Rice's leash and started walking down the embankment. He then motioned for me to get into a small truck. I was hesitant to get into a vehicle with a man I had just met, but my curiosity about what this intriguing goat owner would do led me to follow him in my own car. We drove up a mountain road for about 20 minutes and arrived at a small dairy farm. Paul got out of the car, grabbed a long broom and began gathering fallen leaves. Then he lit a fire and held out his hand to me. "Give it to me." "What, that?" "Let's burn that silly invitation." "I would tell you to let the goat eat it, but paper with chemicals is bad for goats." "Come on, do it while the fire's strong." "But..." Stunned by the sudden suggestion, I was speechless, but the goat and Paul stared at me. Under their silent pressure, I decided to take the plunge. "All right." The invitation I threw into the center of the bonfire made a sound and quickly burned up. The thing that had been tormenting me so much disappeared in less than a minute. I watched the fire burn steadily. "It was such a simple thing to do," I murmured, and Paul said nothing beside me. That night, I received calls from various relatives. Of course, they all asked, "Margaret brought the wedding invitation, but it looks like it's Nancy's husband. What's going on?" So I told them. "Margaret had an affair with my husband and had a child, so we divorced. You can attend the wedding if you want, but I won't be able to because a goat ate my invitation." Then, my relatives laughed. "My invitation was eaten by a goat too, so I can't go," and said. Their laughter made me laugh too, and I was able to sleep soundly for. The next day, I started visiting the dairy farm where Paul worked regularly. Paul was apparently the son of the dairy farmers. His job was to take care of the dairy cows, and Rice the goat was his pet. Besides Rice, he also had goats named Bread and Noodle. Sometimes people would ask him to send the goats out to graze the grass for them. I also learned for the first time that goats can be surprisingly lonely and friendly. I grew very fond of these goats, and as I came to see them, I began helping out on the farm and eventually found myself working there as a live-in worker. From early morning until evening, I worked until I was exhausted, taking breaks to watch the goats eating grass intently. It was a completely different life from working in the city and visiting stylish cafes, but it was so enjoyable that I felt like I could take a deep breath for the first time in a long while. A few months later, Margaret called me and said, "Why didn't you come?" Only then did I remember that it was the day of Margaret's wedding. "Oh, I couldn't come because the goat ate the invitation before I could read it." "So what? Why is everyone talking about goats?" Apparently, our relatives also didn't reply to the invitations because they said the goats had eaten them. The thought of goats munching on invitations made me chuckle softly. "You laughed, didn't you? Sorry. You're terrible, Nancy. You ruined my wedding. I was supposed to get a lot of gifts." "Seriously, did you really think you'd be celebrated after stealing Joshua from me?" "I saved poor him, who wasn't loved by you, Nancy." "No one would believe that. Everyone knows how careless you are." Margaret couldn't respond well to my retort and growled like a dog. Joshua's parents were sensible people, so they were too ashamed to invite relatives to their son's wedding after he cheated on his wife with her sister. "But he loves me more than Nancy." Yeah, good for you that he chose you. I'm busy with cow duties from morning tomorrow. Good night." "What? Cows?" Ignoring Margaret's confusion over the sudden mention of cows, I quickly ended the call. Then I turned off my mobile phone and started getting ready for bed. Margaret and Joshua's betrayal, which had shocked me so much, now seemed utterly unimportant. More importantly, the cows and goats waiting for me early the next morning were much more precious. The next day, after finishing my morning chores and having breakfast, I turned on my mobile phone to find a slew of missed calls from Margaret and Joshua. Ignoring them, I called the one remaining number, my mom's. With a tired voice, Mom told me the details of the wedding the day before. As Margaret had complained, all of Margaret and Joshua's relatives were absent. Even Joshua's colleagues had declined, so only Joshua's friends, who were curious, and Margaret's friends, who were unaware, attended. Margaret had few female friends and quickly got into relationships with men, so she had to reach out to people with thin connections, like former classmates from middle school, to gather enough people. These friends or classmates became uncomfortable when they learned Margaret had a shotgun wedding after cheating on her sister's husband. They stayed away from her, ate their meals silently, and quickly left. The tables were left with heaps of food and gifts, and even after changing dresses and cutting the cake, no one took a single photo. Her letter to her family and the bouquet presentation to her parents were both rejected by Margaret and Joshua's parents, leaving the wedding in an awkward state. The wedding felt more like a funeral, and with a $30,000 deficit, Margaret lost her mind. She turned to her parents for help. "We've fulfilled our duty as parents. Now, you need to handle the rest on your own." And they left her to deal with it. "I wish a goat would eat up my ties with Margaret." Mom chuckled. While I believe parents have a responsibility, Margaret is an adult woman. It's not right for her parents to keep taking responsibility for her. When I suggested this, her parents decided to cut ties with her. A year later, I was cleaning the barn when a rental car pulled into the parking lot. Thinking they might have mistaken it for a tourist farm, I approached. "Are you really working in a place like this?" "Nancy." "Long time no see." "Margaret, Joshua." Two faces I didn't want to see in my haven emerged from the rental car. "Why are you here?" "I asked Mom to tell me where you live, but she wouldn't. So when she wasn't home, I sneaked in and found an address on a delivery slip." "Lucky me." "That's breaking and entering." "Don't be ridiculous. It's my parents' house." "That's the kind of relationship you have to sneak in." When I laughed, her expression vanished. "It's your fault, Nancy. You're the one making me look like the bad one." "Calm down, Margaret." Joshua gently stopped Margaret from grabbing me. Then he spoke to me. "Hey, Nancy. I'm sorry. You quit nursing because you were heartbroken after I left you, right?" "What?" "That's why you're doing this dirty, smelly job. You can't do anything without your nursing license, can you?" "What? What is this guy talking about? His misunderstanding is ridiculous." "I chose this job because I wanted to." "You don't have to be stubborn. I understand everything. So, come back." "What? Come back?" What does he mean by that? He isn't even divorced from Margaret. "Are you saying you want to get back together?" "What about Margaret?" "Margaret is my wife. You can be my mistress." "What?" "We talked about it. Margaret felt sorry for you, crying alone, so we thought we'd include you. Margaret needs help with the kids and the housework. Of course, you can go back to nursing. You get to be with me, and you can quit this job. It's perfect, right?" It's hard to share Joshua, whom I love, but he says I'm his number one, so I'll give you a little of him. "Oh, Margaret, how generous of you." Joshua looked at Margaret with delight. Was he always this crazy? Or did he go mad being with Margaret? No, maybe he was like this all along. I can't believe I was once married to this man. "Nancy?" Joshua and Margaret trembled as I suddenly laughed like a broken toy. After laughing, I looked at Joshua with a straight face. "Are you two an idiot? Huh? I thought you were a better person, but you're this stupid? I'm so glad I divorced you." "Huh? Huh?" Joshua and Margaret looked at each other. "I don't understand why you're hesitating. Did you really think I would cry tears of joy at your stupid suggestion?" Honestly, you've really underestimated me. You're probably having trouble because your place is a mess, right? Aren't there a ton of those bugs you hate so much? How do you know that? Because Margaret can't do housework. Plus, you've been staying up late with her, haven't you? Always late for work? You used to be valued at work for your honesty, even if your performance wasn't great. But now, after cheating with your wife's sister, marrying her openly, and neglecting your work, your reputation must be terrible. He is sweating, having hit a nerve. You're the one regretting letting me go, aren't you? Too bad, because I'm having the time of my life now. No way, not when you're working in a place like this. I don't know why you're looking down on me, but taking care of you and Margaret was way less fulfilling. Plus, I have a boyfriend here whom I absolutely adore. A boyfriend? Joshua is shocked again. You're already seeing someone, right after the divorce? Your current wife stole my husband a month after breaking up with him. He is at a loss for words. Unable to rely on Joshua, Margaret loses it. Just come home already. Mom doesn't help with anything, and my mother-in-law only dotes on the kids while treating me like an enemy. I need you to clear things up, Nancy. That's all your own fault. I haven't done anything wrong. It's all because you aren't kind. She raises her hand towards me. But before she can swing it down, she loses her balance and falls. Margaret? What? A goat? Rice. It seems Rice, who appeared out of nowhere, pulled on Margaret's pristine white dress, causing her to trip. Margaret and Joshua are both stunned by the sudden appearance of the goat. Good job, Rice. You protected me. What are you talking about? Joshua, help me already. Whoa! As Joshua grabs Margaret's hand, he loses his balance and falls too. This causes Margaret to fall face first into the ground as well. Bread! Noodle! The two goats look at us while chewing on Joshua's shirt. Both of them are now covered in mud from the wet ground. What is this? What is this? Rice looks into Margaret's face as she screams. Seeing the goat's long, horizontal pupils and prominent teeth up close, she's completely terrified. Come to think of it, Margaret has been afraid of animals ever since she was chased by a sheep on a rooftop years ago. Stop it! Don't eat me! Margaret pleads with Rice, her face pale. Go ahead, Rice, eat her. You must be hungry, right? Of course, Rice responds obediently but has no intention of eating her. However, Margaret is so panicked she can't move. Help me! Someone help me! Margaret clings desperately to Joshua's neck, making him groan in pain. Somehow, the two of them manage to get to the rental car and try to drive off, but they step on the wrong pedal and crash into a pile of cow manure. The rental car is now filthy and smells horrible, inside and out. Without even realizing it, the two frightened people rushed out of the dairy farm. Rice, bread, noodle. Thank you. I love you. I hugged my beloved helpers tightly. A little distance away, Paul, who had brought Rice and the others to me, smiled with relief. Things didn't go well for Margaret and Joshua afterward. The rental car was in such a terrible state that the rental company was furious. They demanded that it be bought because it was no longer usable. Already in debt from the wedding and having paid me compensation, this must have been a severe blow. Moreover, Margaret was incapable of managing the household finances, and yet Joshua, not thinking, handed over his salary to Margaret because I had been managing it before, so they had no savings. In fact, They were in a situation where they were paying off one debt with another due to missed credit card payments. Joshua finally woke up and demanded a divorce from her. Margaret, desperate not to be abandoned, tore up the divorce papers Joshua brought, sometimes even eating them like a goat. He wanted to escape, but with no place left for him at work or at his parents' home, he had no choice but to return to Margaret. The only solace was that his parents were taking care of the children. Joshua's brother and his wife, who had no children, were even discussing adopting them. The children were innocent, and I hoped they could find happiness. Margaret and Joshua each separately pleaded, "Help me!" or, "It's his fault. I'm not to blame." But perhaps traumatized by the goats, they never set foot in the dairy farm. And so, I managed to secure peaceful and happy days. "Rice, your beard is splendid today too." Paul laughed as he watched me play with the goats again. "Nancy, you really love Rice, don't you?" "Of course, Rice is my savior." "I'm kind of jealous." His slightly pouting face was adorable, and I moved a little closer. "Of course, I'm grateful to you too, Paul. I am living vibrantly now because of him." "Well, I'd like to get an answer soon." His thick fingers touched mine. Wanting to respond to that warmth, I held his large hand tightly. Rice bleated shortly as if teasing our closeness. "Hey! Where the hell have you been?" James shouted at Emily, his voice filled with impatience and annoyance. "I went to buy the things you asked for, remember?" Emily replied, trying to keep her tone even and calm despite the growing tension in the room. "Well then, hurry up and hand them over," James demanded, his hand outstretched expectantly. Emily couldn't understand why she had to be spoken to like this. This wasn't how someone should behave when asking for a favor. "Seriously, when did it come to this?" Emily muttered under her breath, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. She could easily pinpoint the moment when her husband James's attitude had drastically changed. It was after he had been in a car accident that left him unable to walk. Despite Emily's insistence, James had stubbornly refused to stay in the hospital, insisting on returning home. And thanks to that, Emily had been juggling both work and household chores, essentially doing the work of two people. "Whatever. I'm thirsty. Bring me some coffee," James ordered, his tone dismissive and entitled. As a small act of defiance, Emily brought James a coffee that was hotter than usual. After taking a sip, James must have found it too hot because he dropped the cup, spilling its contents. "You did that on purpose, didn't you?" James accused, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Of course not. It's the same as always." Emily defended herself, feeling a spike of indignation at the baseless accusation. "Like hell it isn't," James retorted, his voice rising with anger. Then, in a sudden fit of rage, James threw the cup at Emily. Although it didn't hit her face, it struck the back of her hand, causing her to wince in pain. "You've got to be kidding me," Emily said through gritted teeth, cradling her injured hand. "Who's kidding who?" James shot back, his expression a mix of anger and bitterness. The senseless argument continued for a while until the doorbell rang, bringing it to an abrupt end. "Go answer it," James commanded, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "I know, I don't need you to tell me," Emily snapped back, turning on her heel to leave the room. When she opened the door, there stood a person claiming to be a lawyer. "You're a lawyer? But why?" Emily asked, confusion evident in her voice. "I received a consultation request from James." "May I come in?" The lawyer explained, his tone professional and courteous. "Oh, sure. I'll show you to James's room," Emily replied, still trying to process the unexpected visitor. As Emily led the lawyer to James's room, she couldn't help but wonder what on earth was going on. The lawyer's presence seemed to instantly change James's demeanor from irritable to cheerful. "Finally!" James exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "Finally?" Emily echoed, her brows furrowing in confusion. "Well, you'll find out soon enough," James replied cryptically, leaving Emily to wonder what on earth was about to unfold. "So, lawyer, this woman has been cheating on me, right?" James accused, pointing a finger at Emily. "What are you talking about?" Emily exclaimed, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "I know all about it. You've been meeting up with another man behind my back, haven't you, Emily?" James pressed, his tone dripping with self-righteous indignation. "Huh? That's impossible. What are you saying?" Emily countered, her mind reeling from the baseless accusation. "Anyway, lawyer, this means we can get a lot of compensation from Emily, right?" James asked eagerly, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. At this, the lawyer James had called for adopted a stern expression. "I'm sorry to say, but there is no evidence to support such a claim," the lawyer stated firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "What? That can't be right. I mean, James sputtered, his confidence faltering. "You what? Are you going to say you saw it with your own eyes?" Emily challenged, her anger rising to match James's earlier accusation. Well, yes. I saw it with my own eyes," James insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "But that doesn't make sense, does it? You can't even go outside, right?" Emily pointed out, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. James's words were becoming more and more irrational by the second. "Or maybe someone's been taking you out. But the only person who comes to the house is the home health aide," Emily added, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "In any case, there is no evidence to suggest that your wife has been unfaithful, so my work here is done," the lawyer concluded, standing up to leave. "You've got to be kidding me. Some lawyer you are," James spat, his face twisting with anger and frustration. "I assure you, I am a lawyer. Now, if you'll excuse me," the lawyer replied coolly, exiting the room without a backwards glance. "I'm so sorry for making you come all this way for nothing," Emily apologized to the lawyer, feeling mortified by James's wild accusations. It was beyond embarrassing to have a lawyer come to their home based on James's delusions, only to find that there was no basis for his claims. "If there's anything else, please don't hesitate to contact me," the lawyer said, handing Emily his business card before taking his leave. "I understand. Thank you," Emily replied gratefully, accepting the card with a nod. With a deep sigh, Emily turned and headed back to the room. She found James looking dejected, all his earlier bravado gone. "I hate to kick you when you're down, but I think you owe me a detailed explanation," Emily said firmly, crossing her arms over her chest. Faced with Emily's determination, James seemed to have no fight left in him. From that moment on, James became as docile as a different person. According to James, he had apparently believed the story told to him by the male home health aide who had been coming to their house. To make matters worse, that man had quit his job a few days ago, leaving no way for Emily to get more details about the story. And now, a new home health aide, a rookie, was coming to their house. Several months passed. "I'm always causing you trouble," James said one day, his tone apologetic. On weekdays, a home health aide came to help, but on weekends, it was basically Emily who took care of James. "It can't be helped, can it?" Emily replied, trying to keep the weariness out of her voice. It was while Emily was changing James's adult diapers, as she always did. A message from their daughter, Lisa, arrived on Emily's mobile phone. "What?" Emily muttered, her brows furrowing in confusion. "What's wrong?" James asked, picking up on Emily's change in demeanor. "No, it's nothing," Emily replied quickly, not wanting to discuss it with James. But as Emily glanced over at James, she was met with an even more shocking sight. "You." Emily breathed, her eyes widening in disbelief. "What's wrong?" James asked again, oblivious to the reason for Emily's reaction. "Haven't you noticed?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you talking about?" James demanded, his tone growing impatient. "No, it's nothing. I'm just going to go out and do some shopping," Emily said quickly, forcing a smile. "Oh, okay. Be careful," James replied, a hint of concern in his voice. As soon as Emily left the house, she immediately called Lisa. "That was..." Emily began, her voice trailing off as she struggled to find the words. "Did you see it? I took that photo the other day. I was so surprised, I just had to take a picture." "That's definitely Dad, right?" Lisa asked, her tone a mix of disbelief and urgency. "Yeah, it is," Emily confirmed, her heart sinking at the realization. "But that's not all. I've been doing some digging, and..." Lisa continued, her voice growing more serious with each word. Hearing this, Emily couldn't sit still any longer and immediately headed to the nearest police station. This was too big for me to handle on my own. The situation had escalated beyond my control. "I'm going to the police station right now," Emily declared, her voice filled with determination. "Then I'll go too," Lisa offered, her tone equally resolute. "Are you sure?" Emily asked, touched by her daughter's support. "I think things will go more smoothly if I'm there. So, I'll see you at the police station," Lisa replied, her words filling Emily with a sense of strength and unity. Emily was incredibly grateful for Lisa's cooperation. What was about to begin wasn't just a simple act of revenge. It was a furious retribution. It went without saying what would happen to James now. "I'm Emily, 52 years old, and I recently divorced James, who was the same age as me." The reason for the divorce was James, but even now, looking back, I truly believe he was the worst man imaginable. He was a good person when he was younger, though. I mused, my thoughts drifting back to the early days of our relationship. James and I had joined the same company at the same time and were colleagues. We were both in sales and had a rivalry that pushed us to be better. We were always competing for the top sales performance. "Damn it! I lost again this time. I was pretty confident, too," James would say, his frustration evident in his voice. "Well, I could say the same," I would reply, equally disappointed but determined to do better next time. "Can't you let me have first place once in a while?" James would ask, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I wonder if you'd even be happy if I let you have it," I would muse, my tone teasing. At this, James would adopt a thoughtful expression. Maybe I wouldn't be happy? My pride probably wouldn't allow it anyway," he would admit, his competitive nature shining through. "That's what I thought you'd say," I would reply, a grin spreading across my face. Seeing our interactions, our colleagues would always gossip about when we were going to start dating. But we were the epitome of taking things at our own pace. Work always came first, and we didn't have much interest in being boyfriend and girlfriend. A change came for us when I was 28 years old. It was when I went back to my hometown for the first time in a while. Emily, you're already 27, right? How are things going? My dad asked, his tone a mix of concern and curiosity. How are things going? I echoed, not quite understanding what he meant. Marriage. I'm talking about marriage. He clarified, his expression growing more serious. Well, how am I supposed to get married when I don't even have a partner? I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the growing tension. Hearing this, Dad just sighed and went back to his room. I'm sorry. But try to understand Dad's feelings too. You don't have any siblings, Emily, so he's probably just worried. Mom said gently, her eyes filled with understanding. Yeah, I replied, suddenly feeling a bit guilty for my dismissive attitude. But you know, I'm not telling you to get married right away. You clearly love your job, so there's no need to rush. Mom added, her words providing a measure of comfort. Even though Mom said that, the conversation lingered in my mind long after I returned home. If I thought about a future where I never got married and lived alone forever, it scared me a little. The only thing waiting for me down that path was a lonely death. That was something I absolutely wanted to avoid. And then, one day during lunch break. Actually, I went back to my hometown the other day. They asked me when I'm getting married. But when I said I had no plans, they gave me a blatantly disgusted look. James confided, his tone a mix of frustration and resignation. I was told the same thing recently. The nuance was different, but it was pretty much the same thing. I replied, commiserating with his experience. Seriously? James asked, his eyes widening in surprise. Seriously. I confirmed, a wry smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. We laughed together, then looked at each other. Why don't we try dating? We're pretty similar, so I think we'd get along well. James suggested, his tone a mix of nervousness and excitement. I was actually thinking the same thing. I admitted, feeling a flutter of anticipation in my chest. I can't imagine getting married right away, so let's start with a trial period. If it doesn't work out, we can just go back to how we were before. James proposed, his pragmatic approach putting me at ease. That makes sense. I agreed, feeling a sense of relief at the thought of taking things slow. And so, we decided to start dating with a trial period. For now, we settled on a period of 3 months. Even so, it was ultimately a temporary relationship, so we agreed that it was okay to prioritize our own circumstances. The 3-month period seemed long, yet short. Our tendency to prioritize work above all else was likely a contributing factor. Hey, why don't we try extending the period a bit longer? James suggested, his tone casual yet hopeful. Yeah. I think that's a good idea. I agreed, feeling a sense of relief at not having to make a decision just yet. In this manner, a full year passed by before we knew it. Can I talk to you for a sec? James asked, his expression serious. Sure. But I think I already know what you're going to say. I replied, a knowing smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. You do? James asked, his eyes widening in surprise. In the end, we officially started dating. In hindsight, what was the point of that trial period? I mused, shaking my head at the memory. If we had just done this from the beginning, everything would have been resolved without all the roundabout nonsense. Hating half measures, we gave our all to both work and our private lives. After we had started dating officially and when I turned 30. You seem awfully happy about something. James noted, his tone a mix of curiosity and amusement. Well, you could say that. I replied, unable to keep the grin off my face. So? What happened? James pressed, his interest piqued. I got a promotion, I announced, my voice brimming with pride. What? James asked, his jaw dropping in surprise. So, I'm getting promoted, I repeated, savoring the moment. That's amazing, James stammered, clearly taken aback by the news. Given James's prideful nature, I had expected him to react with displeasure, but that wasn't the case at all. Our relationship was going smoothly, and before we knew it, we were about to turn 31. On a certain holiday morning, James said, "Marry me." He took a small box out of his pocket as he spoke. When did you get that? I exclaimed, my eyes widening in surprise. Well, I found the right moment, James replied, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Can I open it? I asked, my heart racing with anticipation. Of course, James said, his tone gentle and encouraging. When I opened the box, there was a ring adorned with a beautiful diamond. Thank you, I exclaimed, throwing my arms around James in a tight embrace. Having accepted the proposal, I immediately went to greet my parents. The greetings with my future parents-in-law also went smoothly, and our married life was about to begin. However, a problem arose at this point. Somehow, James had quit his job. Why? I asked, my brows furrowing in confusion. I'm sorry, but there's something I really want to do, James explained, his tone apologetic yet determined. Something you want to do? I echoed, not quite understanding. I've always admired engineers, James admitted, his eyes shining with excitement. But I've never heard you mention that before, I pointed out, feeling a bit blindsided by this sudden revelation. Well, I never told anyone. I've saved up a decent amount of money, so it'll work out somehow. Oh, and keep this a secret, okay? James requested, his tone conspiratorial. And so, our newlywed life, fraught with challenges, began. Quitting the company seemed to be a sudden decision, and apparently, James had told his boss that it was to take care of his parents. I was also asked various questions, but for now, I had no choice but to go along with what James had said. It's not like I can tell them the truth, I muttered, feeling a twinge of guilt at the deception. From then on, James shut himself in his room, sitting in front of the computer for hours every day. I knew he was originally a diligent person, but I was worried if he could really catch up by starting to study now. However, something happened that made even that concern fade away. I found out I was pregnant. Seriously? That's great, James exclaimed, his face breaking into a wide grin. Yeah. I have a favor to ask though. I think there will be more things I'll need your help with from now on, I said, my tone serious. Don't worry. I can at least do household chores, James assured me, his voice filled with confidence. After that, my belly continued to grow steadily. However, James, who had been supportive in the early stages of my pregnancy, seemed to have grown tired of it and started doing nothing more often. Hey, I'm not feeling well today, so could you prepare your own meals? I asked, my voice strained with fatigue. What? Why? James asked, his tone a mix of confusion and annoyance. Why? Because my body hurts, I explained, trying to keep my patience. You say that, but you can move around just fine, James retorted, his brows furrowing in disbelief. It really does hurt, I insisted, feeling a wave of frustration wash over me. Ah, fine. I'll go eat out today, James said, his tone exasperated as he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Was it really something to get so angry about? In the end, I waited for the time of delivery while taking care of most of my personal matters myself. A few weeks later, I gave birth to Lisa. I was relieved that she was born safely. My parents came to the hospital, but James didn't come, saying he was busy. "Where's James?" my mom asked, her brows furrowing in concern. He seems to be a bit busy," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. "But today is Sunday. Does he work on holidays too?" my dad pressed, his expression skeptical. I hadn't expected to be questioned like this, so I lost my composure. Dad didn't miss that. "Call James right now," he demanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "What?" I asked, caught off guard by his sudden request. "Just do it," Dad insisted, his expression stern. "This has turned into a hassle," I muttered, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. In this situation, there was no room to refuse. "Fine," I relented, reaching for my phone. I called James, but he didn't answer. "It seems like he's not picking up. Maybe he really is busy," I suggested, hoping to placate my father. "Keep calling until he answers," Dad ordered, his tone unwavering. I had forgotten that Dad was a stubborn man, recognized by both himself and others. After about 5 calls, James finally picked up. "What's up?" "I'm a bit busy over here," James said, his tone slightly annoyed. Well, I just wanted to let you know that the baby was born safely," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. Then Dad told me to put the phone on speaker. "Oh, good job," James said, his tone more casual than congratulatory. "Thanks," I replied, feeling a mix of relief and unease. At that moment, all I could do was pray that James wouldn't say anything unnecessary. "So, when are you getting discharged?" "I'm alone here, and the housework is piling up. I need you to do it," James continued, his tone almost demanding. I thought it was over. Looking at Dad, I saw an expression filled with anger. "Anyway, I think I can be discharged soon. So, talk to you later," I said hurriedly, trying to end the conversation before things escalated further. After that, I was desperately trying to calm Dad down. He was ranting, demanding that I call James here, and criticizing him. Mom managed to handle the situation somehow, realizing that this would cause trouble for the hospital, but from then on, the joy of giving birth had completely vanished. This incident marked the beginning of the deterioration of my relationship with Dad. In the end, after visiting my parents' home when Lisa was in preschool, I never went back. As for James, he managed to find a job 6 months after I gave birth to Lisa. "I'm glad you found a job," I said, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "Well, I studied hard, even sacrificing sleep," James replied, a hint of pride in his voice. I think James was somewhat energetic until Lisa entered elementary school. However, that too came to an end due to James's selfish behavior. "No way! Again!" I exclaimed, feeling a wave of disbelief and frustration wash over me. Well, the work itself was enjoyable. But, I just didn't fit in with the company, or rather, I realized it too late. James explained, his tone almost nonchalant. "You're just realizing that now?" I asked, my voice rising with anger. "Don't get so angry," James said, his tone defensive. "Of course I'm going to get angry," I retorted, feeling my patience wearing thin. James had become unemployed again. I wanted to talk to someone about this, but since I had become estranged from my parents, I couldn't rely on them. But even so, I had allies. It was my parents-in-law. They were very warm, had excellent personalities, and were truly admirable people. I couldn't help but wonder how someone like James could have been raised by such wonderful people. However, even that life quickly came to an end. It happened suddenly. It was when Lisa was in 9th grade. Around this time, James had given up on working for a company and was working as a freelancer on a small scale. "My parents died," James said, his voice devoid of emotion.
"What? Stop joking around like that,"
I replied, not wanting to believe what I had just heard.
"Why would I need to lie about something like that?"
James asked, his tone growing defensive.
"How could this happen?"
I muttered, feeling a sense of shock and disbelief wash over me.
"You knew they were on a trip, right? Apparently, they got caught up in an accident,"
James explained, his voice strained with grief. The thought of never being able to see them again hit me all at once, bringing a wave of sadness and a sense of loss. Even James seemed at a loss for words at that moment. This significant event led James to start going out drinking almost every night. He didn't seem to be working, and his daily rhythm became irregular.
"Is work going okay lately?"
I asked, feeling a growing sense of concern.
"I don't need you to worry about me,"
James replied, his tone dismissive.
"You shouldn't talk like that,"
I said, feeling a spike of frustration at his attitude.
"Can't you just be quiet for a bit?"
James snapped, his voice filled with irritation. The conversations between us as a couple also noticeably decreased. If I tried to talk to him, he would make a displeased face. Lisa also started to avoid talking to James when he was like that. That didn't change even as she progressed through high school and university. And then, when Lisa became a senior. Lisa started living on her own when she entered university, so it was just James and me at home. There was hardly any conversation, whether we were eating or in the living room. We had completely grown cold. Then, one day,
"I'm going out for a meeting today. I think I'll be back in the evening,"
James said, his tone businesslike and detached. After saying that, James left. Since it was Saturday, I was taking care of household chores that I couldn't do on weekdays when I received a phone call. They said James had been hit by a car on his way back from the meeting. I contacted Lisa, and we both headed to the hospital.
"Oh, you came,"
James said, his tone casual despite the situation.
"Are you okay?"
I asked, my voice filled with concern.
"It seems like both my legs are broken, but I'll manage somehow,"
James replied, trying to sound reassuring.
"I see. That's good,"
I said, feeling a sense of relief that James was all right. However, this was just the beginning. James was hospitalized for about 2 months and was discharged after recovering enough to walk. But a week later, he felt pain in his legs and went to the hospital. This time, due to the excessive pain, he went to a nearby hospital he had visited once before.
"This isn't good,"
the doctor said, his tone grave.
"What?"
I asked, feeling a sense of dread wash over me.
"It seems like the condition of his legs is not good,"
the doctor explained, his expression somber.
"So what's going to happen?"
I asked, my voice trembling with fear.
"Depending on the case, there's a possibility he may become unable to move,"
the doctor replied, his words hitting me like a punch to the gut.
"No way!"
I exclaimed, feeling a wave of panic wash over me. I was worried sick, but I also felt a sense of doubt. James was strangely calm.
"For now, let's wait and see,"
the doctor suggested, his tone meant to be reassuring.
"Okay,"
I replied, feeling a sense of helplessness wash over me. On the way home, James couldn't walk without support.
"Are you okay?"
I asked, my brows furrowing with concern.
No, it's really painful, James admitted, his face contorted with pain. Let's get home quickly, I said, trying to hurry our pace. Within a month, just as the doctor had said, James became unable to walk. For now, let's call an ambulance, I suggested, reaching for my phone. But James said, I want to go by taxi. An ambulance would be more reliable, I argued, feeling a spike of frustration at his stubbornness. No, I just can't walk, that's all, James insisted, his tone dismissive. Following James's words, I called a taxi, and we headed to the previous hospital. So, what's the situation? I asked, my heart pounding with anxiety. The condition is quite bad, the doctor replied, his tone grave. So, he won't be able to walk anymore? I asked, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. That's right, the doctor confirmed, his words like a heavy weight on my chest. Looking back now, maybe I should have been more suspicious. In the end, James was diagnosed with paraplegia and became unable to move without a wheelchair. Hospitalization was suggested, but he wanted to recuperate at home. However, since James would be alone on weekdays, we decided to request a home health aide. One was a man in his 30s, and the other was a young woman in her early 20s who was still in training. One day, while living like this, Hey! Where the hell have you been? James shouted, his tone accusatory and angry. I went to buy the things you asked for, didn't I? I replied, trying to keep my tone even despite the growing tension. Then hurry up and hand them over, James demanded, his hand outstretched expectantly. Why did I have to be spoken to like this? This wasn't the attitude of someone asking for a favor. Seriously, when did it come to this? I muttered, feeling a mix of frustration and sadness. It was because he had been in a car accident and lost the ability to walk. James, who hated being hospitalized, selfishly said, I want to go home. Thanks to that, I had been doing the work of two people, both my job and household chores. Whatever. I'm thirsty. Bring me some coffee, James ordered, his tone dismissive and entitled. As a small act of resistance, I brought James coffee that was hotter than usual. After taking a sip, James must have found it too hot because he dropped the cup. You did that on purpose, didn't you? James accused, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Of course not. It's the same as always, I defended myself, feeling a spike of indignation at the baseless accusation. Like hell it isn't, James retorted, his voice rising with anger. Then, James threw the cup at me. It didn't hit my face, but it struck the back of my hand, causing me to wince in pain. You've got to be kidding me, I said through gritted teeth, cradling my injured hand. Who's kidding who? James shot back, his expression a mix of anger and bitterness. The unreasonable argument continued for a while, but it came to an end when the doorbell rang. Go answer it, James commanded, his tone leaving no room for discussion. I know, I don't need you to tell me, I snapped back, turning on my heel to leave the room. Then, the person who appeared claimed to be a lawyer. You're a lawyer? But why? I asked, confusion evident in my voice. I received a consultation request from James. May I come in? The lawyer explained, his tone professional and courteous. Oh, sure. I'll show you to James's room, I replied, still trying to process the unexpected visitor. I led the lawyer to James's room, but I had no idea why this was happening. Upon seeing the lawyer, James, who had been irritated until just a moment ago, broke into a smile. Finally, James exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. finally?"
I echoed, my brows furrowing in confusion.
"Well, you'll find out soon enough,"
James replied cryptically, leaving me to wonder what on earth was about to unfold.
"So, lawyer, Emily has been cheating on me, right?"
James accused, pointing a finger at me.
"What are you talking about?"
I exclaimed, my eyes wide with shock and disbelief.
"I know all about it. You've been meeting up with another man behind my back, haven't you, Emily?"
James pressed, his tone dripping with self-righteous indignation.
"Huh? That's impossible. What are you saying?"
I countered, my mind reeling from the baseless accusation.
"Anyway, lawyer, this means we can get a lot of compensation from Emily, right?"
James asked eagerly, rubbing his hands together in anticipation. At this, the lawyer James had called for adopted a stern expression.
"I'm sorry to say, but there is no evidence to support such a claim,"
the lawyer stated firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument.
"What? That can't be right. I mean,
James sputtered, his confidence faltering.
You what? Are you going to say you saw it with your own eyes?"
I challenged, my anger rising to match James's earlier accusation.
Well, yes. I saw it with my own eyes."
James insisted, though his voice lacked conviction.
"But that doesn't make sense, does it? You can't even go outside, right?"
I pointed out, my eyes narrowing suspiciously. James's words were becoming more and more irrational by the second.
"Or maybe someone's been taking you out. But the only person who comes to the house is the home health aide,"
I added, my tone dripping with sarcasm.
"In any case, there is no evidence to suggest that your wife has been unfaithful, so my work here is done,"
the lawyer concluded, standing up to leave.
"You've got to be kidding me. Some lawyer you are."
James spat, his face twisting with anger and frustration.
"I assure you, I am a lawyer. Now, if you'll excuse me,"
the lawyer replied coolly, exiting the room without a backwards glance.
"I'm so sorry for making you come all this way for nothing."
I apologized to the lawyer, feeling mortified by James's wild accusations. It was beyond embarrassing to have a lawyer come to our home based on James's delusions, only to find that there was no basis for his claims.
"If there's anything else, please don't hesitate to contact me,"
the lawyer said, handing me his business card before taking his leave.
"I understand. Thank you,"
I replied gratefully, accepting the card with a nod. With a deep sigh, I turned and headed back to the room. I found James looking dejected, all his earlier bravado gone.
"I hate to kick you when you're down, but I think you owe me a detailed explanation,"
I said firmly, crossing my arms over my chest. Faced with my determination, James seemed to have no fight left in him. From that moment on, James became as docile as a different person. According to James, he had apparently believed the story told to him by the male home health aide who had been coming to our house. To make matters worse, that man had quit his job a few days ago, leaving no way for me to get more details about the story. And now, a new home health aide, a rookie, was coming to our house. Several months passed.
"I'm always causing you trouble,"
James said one day, his tone apologetic. On weekdays, a home health aide came to help, but on weekends, it was basically me who took care of James. "It can't be helped, can it?" I replied, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. It was while I was changing James's adult diapers, as I always did. A message from our daughter, Lisa, arrived on my mobile phone.
"What?"
I muttered, my brows furrowing in confusion.
"What's wrong?"
James asked, picking up on my change in demeanor. "No, it's nothing." I replied quickly, not wanting to discuss it with James. But as I glanced over at James, I was met with an even more shocking sight. "You." I breathed, my eyes widening in disbelief.
"What's wrong?"
James asked again, oblivious to the reason for my reaction. "Haven't you noticed?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper.
"What are you talking about?"
James demanded, his tone growing impatient. "No, it's nothing. I'm just going to go out and do some shopping," I said quickly, forcing a smile.
"Oh, okay. Be careful,"
James replied, a hint of concern in his voice. As soon as I left the house, I immediately called Lisa.
"That was..."
I began, my voice trailing off as I struggled to find the words.
"Did you see it? I took that photo the other day. I was so surprised, I just had to take a picture. That's definitely Dad, right?"
Lisa asked, her tone a mix of disbelief and urgency.
"Yeah, it is,"
I confirmed, my heart sinking at the realization.
"But that's not all. I've been doing some digging, and..."
Lisa continued, her voice growing more serious with each word. Hearing this, I couldn't sit still any longer and immediately headed to the nearest police station. This was too big for me to handle on my own. The situation had escalated beyond my control.
"I'm going to the police station right now,"
I declared, my voice filled with determination.
"Then I'll go too,"
Lisa offered, her tone equally resolute.
"Are you sure?"
I asked, touched by my daughter's support.
"I think things will go more smoothly if I'm there. So, I'll see you at the police station,"
Lisa replied, her words filling me with a sense of strength and unity. I was incredibly grateful for Lisa's cooperation. What was about to begin wasn't just a simple act of revenge. It was a furious retribution. When I arrived at the police station, I told them that James had been lying about not being able to walk. I reported that he had been fraudulently receiving medical expenses from the insurance company. How did I realize this? First, it was the photo Lisa had sent me. In it, there was James, walking boldly with the young female home health aide.
"I see. He's definitely walking normally in this,"
the police officer noted, his brows raised in surprise. While this photo alone was decisive evidence, I had also noticed James's toes moving when they shouldn't have, as I was changing his adult diapers. Why hadn't I noticed it sooner?
"But we can't just arrest him right away, can we?"
I asked, feeling a mix of frustration and uncertainty. "You're right," the officer agreed, nodding his head in understanding.
"We'll make a decision after conducting a thorough investigation on our end,"
he explained, his tone professional and reassuring.
"I understand. In that case, I'll also consult with a lawyer,"
I replied, already forming a plan in my mind.
"If you're going to take action quickly, that might be a good idea,"
the officer advised, his words filling me with a sense of determination. Lisa and I left the police station.
"But do you have a lawyer in mind?"
Lisa asked, her brows furrowing with concern.
"Don't worry about that,"
I replied, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I took out a business card from my wallet. Then I immediately made an appointment. It was to return the favor to James for what he had done to me before. We went straight to the law office and explained the situation. They said they would take action right away.
"Leave it to us. We will definitely meet your expectations,"
the lawyer assured me, his tone confident and resolute. "Thank you very much," I replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. After parting ways with Lisa for the time being, I returned home.
"You're late,"
James shouted, his tone accusatory and angry.
"The supermarket was a bit crowded.
I explained, trying to keep my voice even despite the growing tension.
Hurry up and prepare the food,
James demanded, his entitlement as strong as ever. I no longer felt irritated like I used to. Now, I just wanted to show James hell as soon as possible. I kept in frequent contact with the lawyer, and all the preparations were made. The operation was set to be carried out the following Monday. I took paid leave to prepare for it. Then, in the afternoon, I met up with the lawyer in front of the entrance.
Shall we go then?
The lawyer asked, his tone businesslike and determined.
Yes,
I replied, feeling a surge of adrenaline course through my veins. We opened the front door and headed towards James's room.
Why are you here? And who's that guy next to you?
James demanded, his eyes widening with surprise and suspicion.
Long time no see.
The lawyer greeted, his tone cool and professional.
I've brought him here today to expose your true nature,
I explained, my voice filled with a mix of anger and triumph.
True nature?
James echoed, his brows furrowing in confusion. First, I threw the photo Lisa had taken at James.
It's laughable that you can't walk after seeing this. Everything has been exposed,
I declared, my tone dripping with sarcasm.
I'm sorry to say, but we've investigated everything, including that person over there. First, her name is Susan, and she's 24 years old.
The lawyer revealed, his words hitting James like a punch to the gut. At this, Susan, James's mistress, tried to stop him. I'll tell you everything, she said, her voice trembling with fear.
Good decision,
I replied, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over me. It seems that the two of them first got involved when James had the accident. It was supposed to be a traffic accident, but the other party was this Susan. At first, she apparently planned to threaten James and steal money from him, but somewhere along the way, she became attracted to him. That's when she introduced him to that hospital. Its true identity was a dangerous hospital that would write any diagnosis as long as you paid them money.
I see. I didn't know that much, but this is quite substantial evidence,
the lawyer noted, his expression serious and thoughtful. Later on, that hospital would develop into a case big enough to make the news, but that's another story. Furthermore, it was all under Susan's orders that James hired a lawyer to try to discredit me.
You've done quite a lot for someone so young,
I said, my tone a mix of sarcasm and disbelief.
For now, what you two have done is a proper act of infidelity. That's why I'm divorcing James, and I'm going to make sure you two pay compensation in the divorce trial. After all, I have a skilled lawyer on my side,
I declared, my voice filled with determination and righteous anger.
Wait! Calm down,
James stammered, his eyes wide with panic.
It's impossible. And what you've done is also fraud, so you might get arrested. Well, I'll contact you again. Bye,
I said, leaving those words behind as I left the house. After that, I successfully submitted the divorce application. And with that, this problem was settled for the time being.
Well then, I'll return to the office for now and take care of the procedures for compensation in the divorce trial,
the lawyer said, his tone businesslike and efficient.
Please do,
I replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over me.
Leave it to me,
the lawyer assured me, his words filling me with confidence. After parting ways with the lawyer, I sent a message to James. Then, immediately, a call from James. Of course, I didn't answer that call. There were a lot of voice messages left, so I tried listening to one of them, and it was all about things I didn't care about, like,
I don't want to pay compensation in the divorce trial, and I can't get in touch with Susan.
About 6 months passed since then. Lisa successfully graduated from university and started a new life. But there was also something that surprised me.
Actually, there's someone I want to marry,
Lisa confided, her tone a mix of nervousness and excitement.
Marriage!
I exclaimed, my eyes widening in surprise.
It's someone I've been dating since high school,
Lisa explained, a smile spreading across her face.
Since high school?
I asked, feeling like one problem had been resolved only for another to take its place. It wasn't that I was against the marriage itself. It's just that, given what had just happened to me, I was worried about her partner. And when Lisa brought her fiancé to meet me, I was surprised again. Her partner was Daniel, Lisa's childhood friend who lived next door.
I guess I have no choice but to allow this marriage,
I said, feeling a mix of resignation and relief.
Thank you, Mom,
Lisa replied, her eyes shining with gratitude.
I'm sorry for the timing.
Daniel apologized, his tone sincere and contrite. You don't need to apologize. It's my problem, after all, I assured him, trying to ease his concerns.
I will definitely make her happy,
Daniel promised, his voice filled with determination.
Please take care of her,
I replied, entrusting my daughter's happiness to him. Then, I visited my parents' home to report the fact that I hadn't been in contact with them for a long time.
It's been a while,
I began, feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. It's good that you came back, my mom said, her tone warm and welcoming.
This is Lisa,
I introduced, gesturing to my daughter beside me.
She's grown so much. Come in for now,
my dad said, his expression a mix of surprise and fondness. I told them about my divorce and Lisa's marriage.
I see. A report of divorce and marriage, how should I put it?
My dad mused, his brows furrowed in thought. It's kind of strange, isn't it? I asked, feeling a sense of awkwardness hang in the air.
It is,
my dad agreed, nodding his head in understanding. We were both in a state of probing each other, but that gradually loosened up. I think our relationship has improved to the point where we can have casual conversations like we used to, with the distance between our hearts narrowing. Even so, to think that Lisa, who was still small, is already getting married. It feels kind of strange, my mom said, her tone a mix of nostalgia and disbelief. So, what kind of person is her partner? My dad asked, his curiosity piqued. He's a childhood friend who lives next door, I explained, feeling a sense of pride and happiness for my daughter.
Oh?
My dad replied, his eyebrows raised in surprise. From there, the conversation continued to liven up with talk of Lisa's marriage. Dad's face also started to show more smiles. Even Dad, who had been so strict, had a softer expression on his face as he looked at Lisa, the grandchild he hadn't seen since she was born. It was then that it happened. I'm sorry for everything until now, Dad said, apologizing to me.
It's fine now. Hurry up and raise your head,
I insisted, not wanting him to dwell on the past. I'm sorry, my mom chimed in, her voice filled with regret. Mom, it's okay now. I had my own faults too. It's not something for you two to apologize for, I assured them, feeling a sense of closure wash over me. Thank you, my parents replied, their voices filled with gratitude and relief. It seems that Dad had been carrying a sense of guilt ever since that day when we had almost become estranged. However, Dad was also stubborn, so he couldn't bring himself to contact me first. Mom, knowing Dad's personality, had apparently decided to leave the decision up to Dad. Then, perhaps because he felt relieved, tears welled up in Dad's eyes.
Are you crying, by any chance?
I asked, feeling a mix of surprise and amusement.
Shut up!
Dad retorted, his tone gruff but lacking any real anger. Touched by the genuine kindness of my parents, Lisa also looked happy. I think it was really good that we were able to deepen our bonds with our family once again. That night,
I thought you would contact me,
I said, picking up the phone with a sense of resignation.
Then let's get straight to the point. Actually, I'm living in a hotel right now, and I'm running out of money,
James began, his tone desperate and pleading. At this point, I could only sigh in exasperation at James, who could only say such things. Oh, I see.
That's rough,
I replied, my tone dripping with sarcasm.
What's with that reaction? It's like you're talking about some stranger,
James stammered, his voice filled with disbelief.
Well, it's only natural. Because we are, in fact, strangers,
I pointed out, feeling a sense of satisfaction at the truth of my words.
Don't you have any sympathy for your ex-husband?
James asked, his tone growing more desperate with each word.
None. And you have your beloved Susan, don't you?
I retorted, my anger rising to the surface once more.
She ran away a long time ago,
James admitted, his voice filled with bitterness and resentment. According to James, things had been tough after the compensation was demanded in the divorce trial. Moreover, he was currently in the middle of a trial for fraud. Since it was a considerable amount, Susan apparently had to borrow her parents' help to pay. As a result, she ended up having to return to her parents' home and was placed under their supervision.
So, you were abandoned by a woman, and with no one else to turn to, you contacted me,
I summarized, feeling a mix of pity and disgust.
Even a little is fine. Even $500. No, $100 is enough,
James pleaded, his tone growing more desperate with each word.
I guess divorcing this kind of man was the right decision after all,
I said, feeling a sense of vindication wash over me.
Anyway, I have nothing to give you. No matter how much you struggle, it has nothing to do with me. Well, do your best to live your life,
I said, my tone final and unyielding. If James had seriously considered us, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way, but there's no point in thinking about that now. It might have been a blessing that I was able to start a new life together with Lisa and her husband. I had intended to live alone, but I was happy when Lisa suggested that we live together. I don't know where James is or what he's doing to make a living now. And that's fine. After all, I have nothing to do with him anymore.
Mom, what's wrong? You have a difficult expression on your face,
Lisa asked, her brows furrowed with concern.
Really?
I was just thinking about that man, I replied, my thoughts still lingering on the past.
Ah, that man. Don't tell me, do you still have feelings for him?
Lisa asked, her tone cautious and hesitant. I turned to her with a smile.
I don't have any lingering feelings. I'm feeling refreshed now,
I assured her, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. From now on, I will live a life that I find enjoyable. I will definitely make up for the time I spent on James, no matter what.
I'm going to marry your sister. ATM is no longer needed.
I could hear the mocking laughter over the phone. But I didn't let out a surprised sound. I thought if I played into their hands, it would weaken my position. And by now, I had not an iota of love left for my husband, Zach.
Okay, brace yourself,
I replied calmly, but inside, anger was boiling over. Zach, who dumped all the childcare, elder care, and housework on me, was enjoying an affair with my sister, Nicole. And Nicole too, after borrowing all that money from me, she slept with my husband and even called me an ATM at the end. It was unforgivable.
You're okay with us divorcing, right? When Zach pressed me, I simply nodded yes.
On the other end of the phone, the two of them cheered. Enjoy it while you can. There's no way they won't get their comeuppance for belittling me like this. I bit my lip hard. My name is Maggie. I'm 60 years old, living with my husband Zach, who's 5 years my senior. Our son, Alan, is 30 this year, already independent and out of the house. I was working part-time at a grocery store until recently, but due to the recent surge in prices, I was forced into early retirement for cost-cutting. The manager, who was very kind since I worked there for many years, even gave me a severance package despite being part-time. It's a bit sad to retire before reaching the age of retirement, but working at the grocery store definitely helped me grow. So I'm very grateful to the manager who continued to employ me. One might think I'm set for a slow life in retirement, but actually, I'm having some domestic issues. Well, more with Zach than with the household. With our loveless and distant marriage, I'm very anxious about living together for many more years. Why did it come to this? Let me start from the beginning. I met Zach over 40 years ago. Back then, I was a student job hunting, talking to various industry veterans. Most of them were seniors from the newspaper club I was part of. At a club drinking party, many alumni, including Zach, would show up. Maggie, what kind of company do you want to work for? Zach, rumored to be the handsome senior in the club, asked me with a comfortable distance. I honestly told him I wanted to work for a stable company. How about the bank I work at? Banking's probably the most stable, right?
Indeed, it seems like a solid job.
While my response was cliché, I was happy Zach invited me to his bank. Encouraged by Zach, I applied to his bank and got the job. It wasn't too difficult as the bank hired many students from my university. Once I started working at the bank, I realized many women liked him. Zach, always invited out for meals after work, seemed out of reach for me. But Zach often asked me out, and despite feeling guilty towards his other admirers, I started going out with him more as I was interested. So, we started dating and got married 3 years later, after which I quit the bank. It's regretful to quit just after 4 years, but back then, most women quit upon marriage. Especially since Zach and I were in the same workplace, he seemed to prefer I work part-time elsewhere. I had no regrets about marrying Zach and quitting my job. For a while, we enjoyed our life together until I got pregnant and gave birth to our son, Alan, at 30. Zach, who used to treat me like a princess, suddenly became indifferent after the birth.
Zach, can you make a bottle for Alan?
A bottle? That's a mom's job. Why do I have to do it? His sudden change in attitude left me more in shock rather than in sadness or anger. I had heard that men sometimes lose interest when their wives give birth. But I thought that was a story for only a small fraction of couples. I never imagined that Zach, who loved me so much, would suddenly cast me aside like throwing something into the open sea after I had our child. From then on, every day was a whirlwind. Zach continued to refuse to help with the baby. Taking care of the baby is a mom's job. Plus, you're a housewife, so it's natural for you to take care of it. I'm busy with work. Zach had his plausible reasons, but they didn't satisfy me. But it's my first time too, and raising the baby alone is hard work. As I countered while watching Zach's reaction, he glared at me. If it's that hard, why don't you go to my dad's? Dad's free and can help you out.
To your father?
Yeah, that's right. I was utterly shocked by Zach's suggestion. Zach's mom had passed away early, and only his dad, Bob, was left, who recently had trouble with his legs and might need to go to a care facility. How could he think of leaving our child with Bob? Moreover, Zach completely refused to be involved with the baby, essentially just dumping it on his parents. Zach's outlandish idea left me troubled. Since then, I received little help from Zach in raising Alan, and I had to do it alone, repeatedly reading childcare books. Fortunately, Alan was a well-behaved and obedient child who listened to me and grew up healthy. When Alan turned 5, after sending him off to kindergarten, I noticed a call on my mobile phone.
Maggie, it looks like Dad collapsed. I'm thinking of putting him in a facility. Can you handle the paperwork? What? Collapsed? Is he okay? And about the facility? I was very surprised by Zach's call. The news of Bob's collapse was alarming. I hoped he had been taken to the hospital in time. Given Bob's leg condition, it must have been quite a struggle. Bob had always been fond of me, treating me like his own daughter, and I regularly took Alan to visit him, even without Zach asking. The in-laws' house was about a 40-minute drive from our home. Every time we visited, "Thank you for coming all this way," Bob would say with a kind smile. Alan and I both loved Bob and, despite the distance, always wanted to visit him again and again. Hearing that Bob had collapsed, I was filled with anxiety, but Zach only mentioned putting him in a facility in a matter-of-fact tone, which irritated me. "Just handle it. I'm busy with work, okay?" "Wait a minute." Zach cut the call quickly after saying his piece. The idea of putting Bob in a facility was unthinkable to me. Unless it was Bob's own wish, it seemed like Zach was just deciding to put him in a facility on his own. After much thought, I decided to take care of Bob myself as soon as he recovered. When I arrived at the hospital where Bob had been sent, he was in the hospital room and had already regained his consciousness. Bob was over 70 but had struggled to continue the family's farming business despite his leg issues. Both Zach and I had asked Bob to rest, but he insisted on going to the field that day. "Maggie, sorry for troubling you." "No, please, just don't strain yourself anymore." "All right." It seemed Bob had learned his lesson this time and stopped going to the field after being discharged. Bob's field was no longer used for crops, leaving only an empty land. Though it could be revived with care, the land would probably be passed on to Zach, his only son, who I doubted would take up farming. I felt sorry for the neglected field but thought it was for the best if it meant Bob wouldn't strain himself further. After that, I started caring for Bob, visiting the in-laws' house about 3 times a week. I also began working part-time at the grocery store around that time, juggling work, childcare, caregiving, and household chores. For childcare, I switched Alan from kindergarten to daycare with extended hours, managing to make time. I worked 4 mornings a week till after lunch and then went to the in-laws' house. After caring for Bob, I would pick up Alan from daycare, go home, and make dinner. It was very challenging initially due to inexperience. Though it became slightly easier as I got used to it, I didn't realize how tired I was becoming. I had no time to talk to Zach and was overwhelmed just dealing with the tasks at hand. 10 years passed in this manner, and I turned 45, Zach 50. By then, Alan had become a teenager and often rebelled against me. But I saw this as a sign of his growing independence and, while feeling a bit lonely, I was happy about his growth. However, Alan never showed any defiance towards Zach. In fact, he hardly ever spoke to him. Zach had abandoned any childcare responsibilities from Alan's birth, leaving everything to me, so it seemed Alan didn't really think of Zach as his dad. It was around this time that our loveless and distant family relationship reached a critical point. The catalyst was a call from my sister, Nicole. "Hi, Maggie. I just got back from a trip to Hawaii with friends and I've got some souvenirs for you. Can I drop by your place?" Nicole, my elder sister by 3 years, has always been reckless with money and had a fiery temperament, making us quite incompatible. She always wore flashy makeup and was more beautiful than me. I was suspicious of her intention to give me souvenirs but couldn't refuse her kind gesture and agreed. When Nicole came over the weekend, she handed me the souvenirs, which I realized were not from Hawaii and were clearly common sweets available locally. I chose to stay silent, thinking that pointing this out would only upset her. "Hey, Maggie. I'm short on cash this month. Can you lend me some money?" Suddenly visiting with a fake souvenir and now this, I wondered what she was up to. "Lend you money? Why?" I suspected it was just Nicole's usual spending habits leaving her broke. "Well, I've been feeling unwell lately. The doctor said I might need to be hospitalized." but I don't have insurance and can't afford the hospital and treatment costs.
Nicole, sounding feeble, left me speechless. What kind of illness required hospitalization? I silently stared at Nicole, who looked at me pleadingly.
Okay. Just pay me back after your treatment.
Thanks. Sisters are the best. Nicole's face lit up as she shook my hand. Despite our differences, she was my sister and I wanted her to get well soon if she was ill. By the way, when is Zach getting back? Once Nicole knew I'd lent her the money, she casually asked this.
Zach just went to the grocery store.
Oh, I see. I'll just say hi then and leave. Right then, the front door opened and Zach returned. Hey, Zach. Oh, Nicole. You're here. Yes, just had something to discuss with Maggie. But I'm done now and will be leaving. As Nicole stood up and passed by Zach, she seemed to whisper something in his ear. After Nicole left.
What did Nicole say to you earlier?
I asked, but nothing important. Zach evaded the question. I remained curious but soon forgot about it. The discovery of Zach and Nicole's affair happened a month later. I planned to visit Bob that day, but work got extended, so I postponed my visit to the in-laws' house to the next day and went home as usual. Alan was at the library, so only Zach should have been home.
Why are there women's shoes here?
As I took off my shoes at the entrance, I noticed a familiar pair of heels. They were the high heels Nicole wore over the weekend. Entering the house, the living room was empty, which relieved me momentarily. But then, from the bedroom, I heard faint, indiscreet voices of Zach and Nicole.
What are they doing?
I considered confronting them right then but hesitated at the last moment. What if Zach demands a divorce after being exposed? Alan wouldn't want to live with Zach. But I wasn't confident I could afford Alan's education fees alone. If we were to divorce, I wanted to wait until Alan had graduated from college. Frustrated, I decided to leave the house, pretending I saw nothing. Instead, I gathered evidence of the affair, taking photos of their traces and secretly saving the exchanges between Zach and Nicole from his mobile phone. It appeared they had been having an affair for about 6 months. Despite the anger boiling inside me, I reminded myself it was for Alan and endured, not exposing the affair. Another 15 years have passed since then, and Alan is now part of the working world. After graduating from college and leaving his first job early, Alan set up his own business and is now working hard as its president. And as the story goes, I had retired from the grocery store, but I was working a little at Alan's company. I had been giving Nicole money for her treatment bit by bit, but when her requests became too persistent, I grew reluctant to lend more and started ignoring her calls. In fact, the signs of Nicole and Zach's affair had disappeared about a year after it came to light. Zach probably got bored of Nicole. He changed his mind and chose to stay married to me. Knowing this, I couldn't bring myself to pursue the matter of the affair anymore and decided to pretend it never happened. But I realized my naivety when I heard about Bob's death. I got the news about Bob from Zach during the day. Bob had lived a long life until 95, but I was deeply shocked by the loss of Bob, who I had cared for so long. Bob, unlike Zach, was kind and considerate, so his passing felt like losing my own parent. Yet even then, Zach said, "Dad seems to have accumulated a lot of wealth, so that's exciting." Laughing. I was so angry that I thought of giving Zach a piece of my mind, but then I heard a woman's laughter from nearby. Oops, did she realize we're together? I was chilled to the bone at the sound of Nicole's voice. Had Nicole and Zach's relationship not ended after all? For 15 years, they had continued their affair without my knowledge. Realizing this, they seemed like an incomprehensible entity to me. "I'm going to marry your sister. ATM is no longer needed." I could hear the mocking laughter over the phone. But I didn't let out a sound of surprise. I thought if I played into their hands, it would weaken my position, and by now, I had not an iota of love left for Zach.
"Okay, brace yourself,"
I replied calmly, but inside, anger was boiling over. Zach, who dumped all the childcare, elder care, and housework on me, was enjoying an affair with Nicole. And Nicole too, after borrowing all that money from me, she slept with my husband and even called me an ATM at the end. It was unforgivable.
You're okay with us divorcing, right? When Zach pressed me, I simply nodded yes.
On the other end of the phone, the two of them cheered. Enjoy it while you can. There's no way they won't get their comeuppance for belittling me like this. I bit my lip hard. After Bob's funeral, I filed for divorce as promised. When I informed Zach, he seemed so delighted that it felt like he was doing it on purpose.
Now that we're divorced, you should leave this house as soon as possible.
Me leave? I asked, surprised, and Zach nodded as if it were obvious.
I'm going to live with Nicole, and you'll be living alone. This house is too big for one person.
Anger turned to disbelief, and I said, okay. Too weary to argue, and agreed to Zach's demands. Though upset, I had already considered my living situation before the divorce. Leaving our home, I headed to Alan's, who was living independently. I had contacted Alan beforehand, and he welcomed his mom, who had just left Zach, with open arms. He's truly a kind son. I resolved to work even harder at Alan's company. A few days later, a man claiming to be a lawyer contacted me. When I went to the specified location, Zach, Nicole, and the lawyer were seated.
I am in possession of a will left by Zach's dad,
the lawyer said, and took out the will signed by Bob from his bag. I was surprised as I didn't know Bob had left a will. As Zach's only child, he was the legal heir to Bob's assets. Being no longer Zach's wife, I had no claim to any inheritance. Why was I called then? As I wondered, the lawyer read the will. Its contents were astounding. Bob had left half of his assets to me. That meant the field Bob owned was now part of my estate. While Zach would inherit the other half due to his legal share, he had surely not expected me to inherit anything.
Why does Maggie get half of the inheritance? I'm his only son. I should receive it all. Dad was very grateful to Maggie for her selfless care, even though they were not related by blood. He meant it as a thank you. Bob.
I was deeply moved by Bob's thoughtfulness.
What the heck is this? I thought we could finally relax with the inheritance.
Nicole twisted her face in frustration. The lawyer then mentioned that Bob's will had also left all of his debts to Zach, but it seemed Zach and Nicole were too upset to hear that part. I was overwhelmed with gratitude towards Bob, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face.
Thank you, Bob.
Seeing me in tears, the two of them seemed to grow even angrier, but the lawyer concluded.
That is the content of the will.
With that, Zach and Nicole seemed to snap back to reality.
I'm not happy about losing half, but hey, we still have half of the inheritance left. Gotta thank the law for that. Zach said as he patted Nicole's shoulder, who nodded in agreement, right. Well, we'll be leaving now. We won't have anything to do with you anymore, so take care. They laughed loudly as they left.
I returned to Alan's house, savoring Bob's last act of kindness. After receiving the inheritance from Bob, I continued working at Alan's place without incident, and before I knew it, 2 months had passed. That's when Zach called me, on a Sunday. Alan and I were both off work, relaxing at home, but my mobile phone started ringing insistently.
Zach!
The air froze between me and Alan as we realized it was Zach calling.
Why is Dad calling? He abandoned you, and now what does he want? You don't have to answer.
Alan said so, but the phone kept ringing persistently. Irritated, I decided to answer to silence Zach.
What is it, calling me repeatedly? You said we wouldn't have anything to do with each other ever again.
I answered with a tone of annoyance, but Zach seemed not to hear me and started talking frantically.
Hey, what's going on? Why are you working at Alan's company? And why is Alan's company being featured on TV? And what's with showing your fancy house?
Zach's near hysterical voice echoed through the phone, causing Alan to frown.
You saw the TV.
I realized why Zach was calling all of a sudden. Recently, a TV station had interviewed Zach's gym, and it was broadcast yesterday. Alan's gym, which combines a gym and cafe, had caught the TV station's interest due to its novelty. Since opening, the gym had rapidly increased its membership, and Alan appeared on TV as a successful young entrepreneur, even showcasing our home as Zach mentioned. The house we live in now, Alan's home, is quite luxurious, far surpassing the neighboring houses in size. So Zach saw Alan's house and was shocked enough to call.
What do you mean you guys are living in such a big house? Over here, Nicole used up all of Dad's inheritance, and I even got left with his debts. Damn it, I didn't hear about that from the lawyer back then.
Zach yelled angrily over the phone. But back then, the lawyer did mention that Bob had left all his debts to Zach. It wasn't my fault that Zach had not listened, and it was none of my business.
It's none of my business, Zach. The lawyer clearly mentioned it, and it's your responsibility for not paying attention. Besides, you knew about Nicole's spending habits even before marrying her, right? I gave her money for treatment and haven't been repaid yet. This just proves to me that you and Nicole are the worst kind of people, quick to betray someone you should trust.
In response to my correct argument, Zach remained silent, unable to say anything.
Besides, isn't it all your fault for cheating on me in the first place? I just don't understand why I have to be blamed.
I let out my pent-up frustrations, feeling somewhat relieved. Realizing he couldn't blame me, Zach suddenly changed his tone to a pleading one. Please, Maggie. I'm begging you, lend me some money. I was supposed to get a retirement fund this year, but I got fired, and all I'm left with are Dad's debts. Nicole left after we argued about money. How am I supposed to live now? You're my only hope. I admit I was wrong about everything. I apologize. Just give me a little bit of Dad's inheritance. You're living a good life with Alan, right? Think of it as helping someone out, okay? His nerve to beg his ex-wife for money after cheating and leaving her was beyond comprehension. Alan, who had been listening to the conversation, looked at me, seemingly wanting to say something. I handed my mobile phone to Alan. Alan turned on the speaker and firmly said to Zach,
Dad, you betrayed Mom and married Nicole, right? And I heard you never took care of me since I was born. I don't have any memories of playing with you after I became aware. It was always just Mom and me. On Parents' Day and Sports Day, it was always just Mom who came. That's why I'm helping Mom with my company and living with her. Why should I, who you never did anything for, lend you money? My only parent is Mom. I won't give you a single dollar.
Alan's strong, businesslike tone choked me up. I could sense Zach gasping on the other end of the phone.
Alan, how could you say that to your dad? Fine, I won't rely on you guys ever again. Don't insult me.
With that, Zach hung up. We looked at the silent mobile phone and then burst out laughing together.
Zach begged us for money, and now he says he won't have anything to do with us. What an idiot. Yeah. Dad has always been like that, getting angry without thinking ahead.
As we discussed Zach's foolishness, the phone rang again. It was Zach. He probably wanted to ask for money, despite saying he wouldn't contact us again. Fed up, I blocked Zach's contact.
That's it. Now that fool can't bother us anymore. Yeah. Thanks, Mom.
His gratitude for being raised seemed implicit.
I should be the one thanking you. You've given me such a great life. No matter how old you get, you're still my precious son.
We reaffirmed our bond as mother and son, grateful for each other's presence in our spacious home. A few days later, my sister Nicole called me. Her request was almost identical to what Zach had said. I couldn't fathom lending more money to Nicole, who hadn't even repaid what she owed me. In fact, I hadn't yet demanded compensation for her affair with Zach, so I successfully sued both of them for damages through a lawyer. They ended up getting divorced after being married. Their marriage only lasted for 2 months. Zach was even worse off than Nicole. The negative inheritance he received from Dad was too substantial. Bob had borrowed a lot of money for farming, managing it all by himself. I hadn't known about it. While caring for Bob, he often complained about Zach. Bob was able to forgive Zach for not taking over the farming business, but the fact that he didn't take care of Alan and not visit his own father was unforgivable. He was also furious with the way Zach treated me, and I always tried to soothe him, saying it was okay. If kind Bob was that angry, Zach must have been quite a negligent son. All of Zach's expected retirement funds were gone due to his dismissal for misconduct. Rumor has it he even tried to embezzle money from his bank to pay off his debts. Had he just worked quietly until the end, he would have received his retirement money. His greed was his downfall. Now, while receiving a pension, he seems to be working 3 part-time jobs to pay off his debts. Starting a new job at 65 and being taught by younger people as a newcomer must be shattering his pride. Although he has worked as a bank employee for many years, his part-time job as a new employee involves a lot of odd jobs. A hard adjustment for someone who never did housework, childcare, or elder care. He'll likely give up soon enough. For Zach, who neglected his son and cheated with Nicole for years, it's a fitting punishment. I hope he manages until the end. As for me, I'm still working energetically at Alan's workplace. The staff, who are around my child's age, treat me very kindly. Our workplace is always full of smiles, attracting many customers. Alan recently got engaged to a girl a year younger than him and introduced her to me. She's a wonderful, sensible young lady. Well respected at work. I was planning to move out when they married, but she insisted we live together. I'm grateful for her kindness and looking forward to our future together. I will no longer be involved in family ties that exist only on paper. With such a shocking statement escaping Grace's lips at the wedding speech, the room went ice cold. Normally, it would follow with, "Thank you, Dad and Mom, for raising me for 27 years." Paul, who was about to become Grace's husband, froze next to her. I, too, withdrew the tears I had been shedding until a moment ago and stared at Grace. Then, unable to hold back the laughter bubbling up from deep within, I burst into inappropriate laughter. All guests turned their eyes towards me, standing at the very back. That line is more fitting for me, don't you think? Unbothered by the guests' stares, I flashed Grace a challenging smile. What? What do you mean? When Grace retorted with mockery, I finally stood up. My name is Stella. I'm 60 years old and currently work for a foreign consumer goods company. There's a reason why I say currently. After graduating from college, I moved through numerous companies. Having dreamed of working hard once I became an adult, I changed jobs every few years to advance my career after getting a job at a consulting company. I sought new challenges in various companies rather than staying with one, thanks to my fickle nature. My efforts were quickly recognized by my bosses, leading to promotions and substantial salaries at each company. Thus, at the foreign consumer goods company I currently work at, I have been making good progress, reaching top sales performance 3 years after joining. No woman has worked long and in various roles around my age, so promoting me seemed to enhance the company's reputation as a business that promotes women's career advancement. I'm now happily serving as the sales department manager. I have a very blessed life at work. My career-focused life took a turn towards family 15 years ago, while working at a securities firm. That's where I met Kevin, my husband who is 2 years my junior. Kevin had been working in the accounting department of a securities firm since high school graduation. His gentle nature wasn't suited for sales, but his precision made him perfect for accounting. I had the opportunity to visit the accounting department from time to time, and Kevin approached me there. Though I felt I was too old for romance, Kevin was serious. Attracted to his sincerity, I eventually fell for him and initiated our relationship. Kevin was surprised and then blushed. Thank you. I feel the same way. Our pure-hearted exchange, albeit us both being in our 40s, led to laughter from us both. Our relationship flourished, and Kevin proposed within a year. However, I actually have a daughter, he revealed. Despite my surprise, I expressed my desire to marry him if he and his daughter were agreeable. Kevin thought it over and then decided to introduce me to his daughter, Grace. When I first met Grace, she was a 12-year-old elementary school student. "Nice to meet you, I'm Stella." I greeted Grace with a smile, trying to be as non-threatening as possible. Grace returned the greeting with a smile. "Hello." Her response put me at ease. "See, Grace? You've got a mom now." "Yeah." Grace nodded in agreement to Kevin's words and happily went back to her room. I wonder if she wasn't scared? No, she seems fine. I'm relieved. I'm relieved too. Grace is so cute. Kevin seemed pleased when I praised Grace. I learned he had separated from his wife 5 years ago. It seemed being complimented on Grace, who he had been raising alone, made him feel good. Which I understood. After Grace accepted me, we got married a month later. Our marriage settled into a routine where I worked late and Kevin got off on time and took care of home affairs. With Grace becoming a middle schooler next year, she could stay home alone for short periods. Kevin seemed to like housework, and I'm grateful because he does the laundry and cooking without complaining. I did my part around the house with cleaning and dishes, within my capacity. People around us would say, "How lucky you are to have a husband who helps out." Our marriage got off to a smooth start. Grace was a bit shy around me at first, but that quickly faded, and we became close enough to go out together. She wrote me letters on my birthday and even shared stories about boys she liked. Perhaps she longed for the female companionship and conversations she never had, being raised by a single dad. I tried my best to be Grace's mom. However, our close mother-daughter bond began to unravel a while after Grace entered middle school. She hit her rebellious phase. Her friends were all mischief makers, getting into makeup and late-night outings, making their way of having fun more extravagant. Grace, mingling with such girls, spent her days having fun, which naturally led to her grades dropping in periodic tests. "Grace, don't you think you're going out a bit too much lately? If you keep this up, you might not even make it to high school." I warned Grace for the first time. Grace, taken aback by my scolding, retorted, "Huh? Why do I have to be lectured by a stranger like you?" It was the first time I heard such heartless words directed at me. A stranger? We were getting along just fine until recently. I was just being polite. I had to be nice to you, or Dad would feel sorry. All the smiles Grace had shown me were fake. Realizing this filled me with frustration and helplessness. Grace continued to complain. "I thought about mentioning this before, but isn't your cooking bad? I want to eat Dad's cooking. Don't mix your laundry with mine. We're strangers, after all." About everything I did. Her criticisms were always delivered in Kevin's absence, revealing Grace's malicious nature. I considered discussing it with Kevin, but knowing he cared deeply for both his daughter and me, I knew it would sadden him. I didn't want to upset him or add to his worries, so I never brought it up to him. Grace's harassment escalated from verbal attacks to actions, like removing important documents from my bag before work or finishing off a cake Kevin had saved for me. Her ability to charm everyone meant Kevin never noticed her tormenting me, making me dread even seeing Grace. The attacks from Grace, which only worsened over the years, continued for 15 years. She still acted sweet in front of Dad. As she grew into adulthood, her antics became more troublesome, like withdrawing money from our joint account or stealing my precious jewelry. When I was about to reach my breaking point, "I'm getting married. The wedding is next month," Grace announced. "Really? So suddenly?" At 27, Grace was at a reasonable age for marriage. But the abruptness of a wedding next month left me struggling to keep up. What's wrong with sudden? Timing is everything in matters like this. Just so you know, I'll marry even if you oppose. Grace seemed uninterested in my opinion, quickly retreating to her room after merely informing me of her marriage. That night, I shared the news of Grace's upcoming marriage with Kevin.
What's this all about? I haven't heard anything. Bring Grace here right now,
Kevin demanded in an unusually stern tone, so I called Grace back.
If you're getting married, introduce us to your fiancé. We'll talk about the wedding after that.
Faced with Dad's reasonable demand, yes, Grace meekly responded. A week later, as promised, Grace brought her fiancé over. Nice to meet you.
My name is Paul. I apologize for the late introduction.
Paul bowed respectfully to Kevin and me. He seemed to be a public servant from what we heard. His sincere appearance and manner of speaking pleasantly surprised us, considering we had braced ourselves for someone entirely different. After chatting for a while with the four of us, Paul made remarks that put Grace in a favorable light in front of us, revealing his serious nature.
See? He's a good guy, right? It's okay to marry him, right?
Grace, leaning forward, was eagerly looking at Kevin, not me, pressing him for an answer.
Yeah. Paul seems like a good guy, and I have nothing against it, but what about you, Stella?
I'm all for it. Although surprised by Grace's sudden announcement, I was actually pleased because I thought Grace getting married would mean she would move out of this house.
Yay! Then the wedding is set for next month as planned.
Sure. Grace left the house with Paul, both of them beaming with joy. I wonder if they plan to stay somewhere tonight. Paul and Grace seem to have quite different personalities and capabilities for life, but I wonder what will happen after they get married. Anyway, being able to get away from Grace was the happiest thing for me. Since Grace introduced us to Paul, she has been away from home more often. I thought she was busy preparing for the wedding with Paul, but one day I ran into Paul on the bus home from work. I had been working overtime for about 3 hours, as usual, but the commuter bus was packed.
Oh, isn't it Paul? Just finished for today? Good evening.
Yes, it's been busy lately.
Really? It's tough being a civil servant. By the way, how long has lately been?
It's been like this for about a month now. A month. Hearing Paul's words, I suddenly became curious. It's been about a month since Grace started being away from home. But Paul has been having busy days every day. Then what exactly has Grace been doing, and where? I suppressed my desire to ask Paul and went home. Grace didn't come home this day, again. Something smelled fishy. It's been a month since I started suspecting something about Grace. Finally, the day of Grace and Paul's wedding arrived. Both Kevin and I couldn't help but reflect on everything up to this point, as it was our daughter's once-in-a-lifetime wedding. Kevin was moved to tears walking down the aisle with Grace in her dress. Thinking of Grace leaving my hands, I also cried, but for a different reason. However, to those around, it must have looked like a mom crying deeply over her daughter's wedding. The wedding and reception were a great success, and it was time for the highlight of the evening, the bride's letter to her parents. As Paul placed his hand on Grace's back, she began to read the letter. Kevin and I were, of course, crying again.
I'd like to take this moment to say something to Mom.
The beginning of the letter was unusual, and the audience was a bit restless.
I will no longer be involved in family ties that exist only on paper.
With such a shocking statement escaping Grace's lips at the wedding speech, the room went ice cold. Normally, it would continue with,
Dad, Mom, thank you for raising me for 27 years.
Paul was frozen next to Grace. I, too, retracted the tears I had shed until then and stared at Grace. Unable to suppress the laughter rising from the pit of my stomach, I burst into inappropriate laughter. The guests all turned to look at me in the back.
That's my line, you know?
Ignoring the guests' gazes, I gave Grace a challenging smile.
What? What do you mean?
Grace replied mockingly, so I finally stood up. As I walked from the back seat, I could hear the guests whispering about what was happening. The wedding staff seemed flustered in the corner of my vision, but I continued regardless.
You might not know, but I've been the one paying for your mobile phone and insurance bills, not Dad. And when I heard you were getting married, I thought I no longer needed to pay for those, so I changed them to be deducted from your account." "What? What are you talking about?"
Grace glared at me with the corners of her eyes lifted. I did exactly what I had just explained. Hearing that Grace was getting married, I thought my role was over, so I had arranged for the various expenses I had been paying on Grace's behalf to be taken care of without my intervention. Grace probably assumes that Dad is the main financial supporter of the household. However, the reality is different. I earn more than Kevin, so I have been the one paying for the house mortgage, the car loan, everything. It's just as I said. You've been playing the good daughter in front of Dad while bad-mouthing me behind my back. So, when I heard you were getting married, I was genuinely happy. Finally, I could cut ties with you. Just like you said, I don't want anything to do with a stranger who's only related by registry." The murmurs of guests whispering to each other reached my ears. Grace's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Paul, on the other hand, turned pale.
"What are you talking about? That's a lie. There's no proof I've ever badmouthed you, you awful hag,"
Grace exclaimed and then clamped her mouth shut as if realizing she had said too much. A decent person wouldn't use such words against their parent, would they? Caught in the act, Grace glared at me, tears welling up in her eyes. Seeing Grace like this, Paul began to tremble.
"What are you saying to your own parent? I thought you were a nice, polite, cheerful girl, but I had no idea you were this twisted. This is marriage fraud. I'm calling off the wedding right now."
Hearing Paul's furious declaration, Grace looked shocked. She must have never imagined her own words would trigger the cancellation of her engagement. She started to protest, as if wanting to say stop anything but that.
"What are you talking about? I haven't told you yet, but I'm pregnant. It's only been 6 weeks, so you wouldn't have noticed. And you're saying you won't get married? That's irresponsible."
The word pregnant stirred murmurs around us. But I was expecting it. Paul, however, showed no sign of being flustered by Grace's announcement. Grace, on the other hand, was confused by the unexpected reactions from me and Paul.
"What's the matter? Too shocked to respond? For the sake of the child, we have to get married, right?"
Grace wore a triumphant smile. It seemed she thought that bringing up the pregnancy would make Paul unable to refuse marriage. But Paul, with a somber face, said in a low voice,
"Is that child mine?"
"What?" Paul's expression darkened. I listened to Paul's words with bated breath.
"I always took precautions when we were intimate. You know that, right? And yet you boldly claim to be pregnant. Is that child really mine?" "What are you?"
Now it was Grace's turn to tremble. I seized the moment to speak up.
"No, it's not. I've heard that Paul has been busy this past month. But you, Grace, often came home late or were gone the whole day, despite only working part-time. There's no overtime in your job. So, where and with whom were you wandering around?"
I edged closer to Grace. Her expression twisted further.
"That was with friends."
"I have friends, you know." Grace's desperate reply made me unable to stop laughing.
"Friends? It's strange for friends to be arm in arm entering a hotel, don't you think?"
I thrust my mobile phone screen in front of Grace's eyes. In fact, since I began suspecting Grace, I had started an investigation into her infidelity. I couldn't bear the thought of Ernest Paul being deceived. I poured the money I earned into hiring a detective, and soon enough, evidence like this came to light.
"What is this? Bringing this up is just low. You're not a mother. I've never heard of a mother slandering her own daughter."
Grace screamed through the microphone, causing everyone to cover their ears. Despite there being no room for excuses, Grace still refused to admit her guilt, which made her seem even more pitiable. I was about to speak again when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. Stopping next to me was Kevin.
I've been listening to the conversation, but what's going on here?
Kevin's voice, low and seemingly coming from the depths of the earth, made Grace tremble. It was the first time I had seen the always gentle Kevin express anger like this.
Dad, this is a misunderstanding. I haven't been unfaithful. How can you lie so calmly? You're about to get married, and you have a child with another man that's not Paul? Stop joking around.
Grace shivered at Kevin's stern voice.
It's not just that. How can you speak to Mom like that after she's taken care of you for 15 years? I see you've been using such foul language towards Mom behind my back all this time. Mom has loved you like her own daughter, even though you're not related by blood. She's more competent at work than I am and earns more money. She's been the one paying for your education mostly. And yet, you repay her kindness with ingratitude. I won't forgive that. It's not true. Dad, Mom is lying. Please believe me. I'm your daughter.
Grace looked at Kevin with teary eyes, hoping for redemption, but Kevin quickly crushed that hope.
Daughter? No. From today, you're not my daughter. My daughter wouldn't do such a cowardly thing. From today, we're cutting ties. Anyway, apologize to Mom, Paul, and everyone gathered here. I'm sorry.
Grace apologized profusely and then left the venue in her wedding dress. I saw a man among the guests hastily leave the venue after Grace. Likely her affair partner. Inviting her affair partner to her own wedding was insanity. I was made painfully aware of how deranged Grace was.
Paul, I'm truly sorry. Please allow me to apologize to the family members later.
I should be the one apologizing for not noticing what Grace was really like. Even in what must have been the hardest moment for him, Paul's consideration for us showed he was truly a good and earnest person. Kevin and I went around apologizing to the guests, and the unprecedented wedding was thus brought to an abrupt end. After that, Grace left the house. Or rather, Kevin told Grace.
Don't come back.
Grace pleaded persistently.
I'm sorry. I've reflected on my actions. Please let me stay here.
But Kevin did not forgive Grace. Likely considering the 15 years of scorn she had directed at me. I thanked Kevin and vowed never to associate with Grace again. Grace reluctantly rented an old apartment in the countryside after being denied a return to our home. Her affair partner turned out to be a man with no capability for living, only working part-time twice a week and loafing around. Grace probably thought her marriage to this man would be opposed. Perhaps she planned to marry the earnest Paul to satisfy us and then find a reason to remarry her affair partner. While her true intentions are unknown, neither Kevin nor I could accept Grace after she hurt Paul and acted selfishly. Although Grace had a job, it was part-time, so she must be living at her financial limits. She must be struggling to pay for even her mobile phone and insurance bills I used to cover. The hardship she's facing now is a consequence of the good life she once had. Grace might have many desires, but likely none are being fulfilled. But this is the result of her own actions. I believe she should learn the hardships of living through struggle. Meanwhile, Kevin and I have been enjoying peaceful days together. Kevin chose me, his wife, over his biological daughter. Kevin says, "Of course. I truly respect you, Stella. Let's continue to support each other." I'm truly happy, and Kevin, who diligently takes care of household chores, is a wonderful husband. I feel nothing but gratitude for our happiness. We've actually continued to stay in touch with Paul. Paul, once depressed by Grace's betrayal, seems happy with a new girlfriend recently. Though we should have no relation to Paul anymore, he seems to like us and occasionally invites us out for meals like a family. I wish to watch over Paul's happiness from afar.